You are working to the limit, waking up early, running all day, putting out fires, paying bills, swallowing pressure. And even so, life stays stuck. The money disappears, the peace is gone, and the future never arrives. Broken, suffocated, humiliated by your own reality, unable to build, get out of the struggle, or see a different future. And the most infuriating part? You look at all of this and think the problem is just a lack of money. But it isn't. You may be doing everything you can to win and still be feeding the very thing that is keeping you broke. Because financial stagnation does not begin only when money is missing. It begins when the mind gets sick, when decisions become corrupted, when habits sabotage destiny, and when a person gets used to calling disorder a routine. And here is the truth that almost no one has the courage to say. Many people are not trapped because they earn too little. They are trapped because they think wrong, decide poorly, act on impulse, and repeat behaviors that push their own lives downward. Proverbs exposes this root brutally. Ruin is not born first in the wallet. It is born within, in a mind without direction, in behavior without self-control, in a life without wisdom. So, if you work, fight, try, push yourself, and even so remain financially suffocated, maybe your problem is not only what is missing in your pocket. Maybe the problem is what is ruling you on the inside. There are people who live in almost constant financial pressure. They work, get paid, pay bills, organize one thing here, squeeze another thing there, breathe for a few days, and soon after go right back to the same suffocation, the same weight, the same feeling that life is not moving forward. And the most dangerous part is that over time, this starts to seem normal. The person begins to accept chaos as routine, limitation as destiny, and scarcity as identity. They look at their own life and think, maybe this is just how it is. Maybe money will never be left over for me. Maybe I was born to live putting out fires. But this is where Proverbs comes in to confront that lie. Because Proverbs reveals that many times financial stagnation does not come only from the outside. It is also born within, in invisible patterns, disorganized decisions, poorly governed impulses, lack of discipline, absence of vision, and resistance to correction. The problem is not only what comes into your pocket. The problem is also what is governing your mind, your behavior, and your direction. Many people do not realize it, but there are habits that seem normal and still sabotage prosperity, drain stability, and prolong cycles of delay for years. This video is for those who feel like they are always in motion, but never in progress. For those who strive, work, try to make it work, but remain stuck, tired, overloaded, and frustrated. For those who already understand that something is wrong, but still have not been able to clearly see the root of the problem. Because there are hidden principles that separate those who live merely surviving from those who begin to build with wisdom. Whoever lives putting out fires reacts to the month. Whoever lives with direction begins to build the future. Proverbs 4:7 says that wisdom is the principal thing. Proverbs 21:5 shows that the plans of the diligent lead to abundance. And Proverbs 13:18 warns that poverty and shame come to the one who rejects instruction. In other words, winning financially does not begin with money. It begins in how you think, how you decide, and how you live. This is where wisdom comes in, not as pretty theory, but as real adjustment to break stagnation and align your life. So if this topic makes sense to you, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and comment down below. I choose to come out of stagnation with wisdom. There are people who wake up early, run all day, solve problems, pay bills, answer messages, do 1,000 things, and still remain stuck in the same place. And that is where one of the most dangerous hidden principles of financial stagnation lives, confusing movement with progress. Many people do not realize it, but being busy is not the same as moving forward. Being tired does not mean your life is being built with wisdom. Sometimes what looks like effort is just repetition. The problem is not only money, it is direction. There are people suffocated, overloaded, disorganized, living on autopilot, thinking this cycle of rushing proves diligence, when in fact it only proves lack of control. Proverbs reveals that the plans of the diligent lead to abundance, not merely rush, not merely chaos, not merely improvisation. Effort without direction exhausts, and when the mind does not see that, the person spends years thinking they are fighting for the future, when they are only surviving the present. Think with me honestly. How many people work hard, but never stop to decide what truly builds stability, prosperity, and vision? They pay what is urgent, put out fires, chase after what is overdue, but they do not build a foundation. It is as if their whole life is becoming a pile of reactions, reacting to bills, reacting to promotions, reacting to fear, reacting to comparison, reacting to scarcity. And then behavior starts being shaped by pressure, not by practical wisdom. The root of this is in behavior. Because whoever lives in survival mode almost never asks, does what I am doing today take me out of financial stagnation, or does it only keep me busy? And pay attention to this, because it is strong. Movement is not progress. You can spend the entire day tired and still remain stuck. You may even look productive to others, but inside feel that everything is heavy, lost, confused, and without direction. The wise builds, the foolish wastes, and many people are wasting energy where they should be building a path. This is where wisdom comes in. Proverbs 14:23 shows that in all labor there is profit, but mere talk leads to poverty. But there is a deeper layer here. It is not enough to do just any work in just any way. It is not enough to fill your day with tasks and think that this alone will generate abundance. Whoever wants to prosper needs to align effort with purpose, diligence with prudence, work with planning. I have seen people who fight hard, the kind who never stop, but who at the end of the month remain frustrated, tired, and with the feeling that life is not moving forward. It was not a lack of strength, it was not a lack of potential, it was a lack of direction, it was a mindset trapped in the immediate, it was the kind of invisible sabotage that seems normal. The person thinks, I'm doing everything I can. But doing everything is not always doing what is right. Sometimes what is missing is not more sweat. It is correction. It is vision. It is learning to govern decisions, habits, and priorities before chaos governs you. That is why the best analogy here is this. There are people living as if they are running on a broken treadmill. Sweating, pushing themselves, feeling the weight, feeling the exhaustion, even feeling a false sense of productivity, but staying in the same place. And do you know what makes this even more dangerous? The fact that this invisible mistake is expensive, because over time, the person starts to think that prosperity is not for them, that stability is other people's luck, that building is a privilege for a few. But it is not. Stagnation begins when you stop distinguishing between what keeps your day standing and what actually changes your tomorrow. So the practical question is, what are you doing today that truly builds your future? What is survival and what is construction? What is urgency and what is direction? Because when you begin to see this, another truth appears, and it affects not only your wallet, but your whole mind. Sometimes financial life is not stuck because of lack of money, but because of an internal disorder that has not yet been confronted. Many people think the financial problem begins with a lack of money, but in practice, the problem almost always begins earlier, inside the mind. And I want you to pay close attention to this, because this is one of those hidden principles that changes the way a person sees their own life. Financial stagnation is also born from a disorganized mind. The problem is not only money, it is the internal condition of someone trying to manage life without self-control, without prudence, and without direction. There are people who want prosperity, want stability, want to win, but keep deciding on impulse, spending emotionally, buying to ease the weight of a bad day, reacting to exhaustion, frustration, chaos, and comparison. And without realizing it, they build a cycle of sabotage. Many people do not realize it, but mental disorder always leaks into financial life. What is confused on the inside begins to show on the outside, in decisions, in habits, in waste, in delays, in pressure, and in that constant feeling of being trapped, stuck, and suffocated. That is why the root of this is in behavior. A disorganized mind cannot sustain construction for very long. It may even start something, get excited, make promises to itself, but soon gives in to the desire of the moment, impulsiveness, quick comfort, temporary relief. And here is a point that almost no one talks about clearly. People do not always spend because they need to. Many times they spend because they want to escape a feeling. They want to escape anxiety, pressure, neediness, emptiness, the feeling of limitation, the pain of seeing their own life stagnant. So they buy, they reward themselves, they try to look better than they feel. And this is the kind of mistake that seems normal but charges a high price. Appearance is not prosperity. Movement is not progress. And emotional relief is not wisdom. When the mind is tired, confused, and out of control, money becomes a tool of escape, not of construction. And money without direction becomes wind. It comes in, passes through, disappears, and the person still does not understand why they can never move forward. Proverbs reveals that self-control is worth more than outward conquest. In Proverbs 16:32, wisdom shows that one who rules his spirit is better than one who conquers a city. This is incredibly powerful because it dismantles the illusion that winning in life is only about earning more, producing more, achieving more. No. The wise man understands that if he does not govern himself, he will lose internally everything he tries to build externally. And Proverbs 25:28 goes even deeper. Whoever does not control his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls. Now stop and imagine that scene. A city without walls is vulnerable to everything. Anything can enter, anything can invade, anything can take away what should have been protected. That is exactly what happens with a mind without self-control. A promotion comes in and takes your planning. A desire comes in and breaks your discipline. A comparison comes in and steals your prudence. An emotion comes in and destroys your stability. Whoever wants to prosper needs to understand this once and for all. What destroys many people is not the lack of opportunity. It is the lack of internal walls. And here is the practical application that really starts to align life. Before asking, how can I earn more? The right question is, how can I better govern my decisions? Before trying to multiply money, you need to learn not to waste your strength, your peace, and your resources on impulse. Create a pause between desire and decision. When you want to buy something, ask honestly, do I need this, or do I just want to escape a feeling? When you feel anxious, instead of running to spending, write down what you are feeling. When the urge to reward yourself hits, ask whether that reward builds your future or only feeds the cycle. That is practical wisdom. That is correction. That is learning to master yourself. Because lack of self-control is expensive, and not only in the wallet. It costs direction, costs stability, costs vision, costs prosperity. And when you start to realize this, another uncomfortable but liberating truth arises. Maybe your problem is not incapacity, talent, or potential. Maybe what is keeping your life stuck is something even simpler and more serious at the same time: the lack of discipline to sustain what you say you want to build. There is a truth many people avoid facing because it confronts them without making noise. There are poor people not because of lack of potential, but because of lack of discipline. And I know that is uncomfortable because it is easier to believe that delay comes only from lack of opportunity, the economy, circumstances, luck, or even bad timing. But Proverbs reveals that there is an invisible pattern that keeps many people's lives stuck. And this pattern almost always shows up in repeated behavior, not in the dream the person says they have. There are intelligent, talented, creative people, full of ideas, full of the desire to win, but they remain stagnant because they cannot sustain routine, cannot maintain direction, cannot turn intention into construction. The problem is not only money. The problem is that many people want prosperity without diligence, want stability without self-control, want abundance without discipline. And when that happens, life starts looking like a beautiful promise that never leaves the paper. Stagnation begins when a person trades consistency for momentary enthusiasm. One day, they want to change everything. The next day, they have already gone back to old habits. One day, they promise they will organize their financial life. The next day, they spend on impulse. One day they feel motivated, the next day they give up because they did not see quick results. And this is the kind of sabotage that seems small, but costs a lot over time. Poverty begins in the mind when a person starts depending on desire to do what only discipline can sustain. Whoever wants to prosper needs to understand this. You do not build a strong life based on peaks of excitement. You build a strong life with habits, correction, consistency, and practical responsibility. Many people are tired, frustrated, and limited not because they are incapable, but because they are trapped in a cycle of trying and abandoning. They start and stop. They plan and do not execute. They decide and do not maintain. They want to reap without protecting the seed. They want a big result with small behavior. And so they remain stuck, confused, overloaded, feeling unproductive, when in reality, what is missing is not talent, it is steadiness on the path. Proverbs 6:11 brings the ant as a model, and this is powerful because it dismantles the fantasy that financial greatness is born from a magical breakthrough. The ant does not build in spectacle. It builds in repetition. It does not wait to feel like it. It does not depend on applause. It does not move on impulse. It operates with diligence, foresight, discipline, and direction. Proverbs 10:4 reinforces that lazy hands make one poor, while diligent hands bring wealth. And here it is not only about physical laziness, as many people think. There is a quieter laziness. The laziness to write down expenses, to review decisions, to learn, to adjust patterns, to endure the discomfort of change. There is an emotional laziness that makes a person run from responsibility and hide behind excuses. And Proverbs 12:24 shows that the hand of the diligent will rule. In other words, discipline is not only about money, it is about government. Whoever does not govern themselves gets lost. Whoever does not control their own habits ends up being controlled by their consequences. And that is why wisdom changes patterns, because it takes the person out of illusion and puts their feet in real construction. Prosperity is like building a wall of bricks. No one looks at the first brick and sees greatness. No one gets emotional over the simple beginning, over recording expenses, over the decision to set aside part of the money before spending, over the small no said to an impulse, over the quiet routine of someone trying to align their life. But that is exactly where transformation begins. One right brick a day seems like little to the one who thinks only about the immediate. But in the right time, that pattern becomes structure, becomes stability, becomes fruit. Now think about the opposite. Whoever skips days, whoever lives in improvisation, whoever only acts when they feel like it, never finishes the wall. And many people are like that, surrounded by plans but without construction. So here is the practical part. Create financial micro-habits. Write down everything that leaves your money for a few days. Set aside a small amount before spending. even if it seems little. Choose one habit to correct at a time, and sustain that until it becomes part of you, because discipline generates stability. But there is another point that presses even harder on this construction, and it catches many people by surprise. It is not enough to do what is right. At many moments in life, you will also have to learn to say no to what your emotions want now, but your future cannot afford later. Many people think the financial problem is only in earning little, but in many cases, the real problem lies in not knowing how to restrain themselves. And here is one of the most important hidden principles of all. You do not overcome financial stagnation without learning to say no. Not to everything, not in a bitter way, not like someone living in emotional scarcity, but like someone who understands that wisdom is also restraint. Many people do not realize it, but every prosperous life needs limits. Limits for desires, limits for impulsiveness, limits for social pressure, limits for emotional neediness, limits for appearance. Because the problem is not only money. The problem is that there are people trying to build stability while saying yes to everything that weakens their construction. Yes to spending for validation. Yes to purchases driven by comparison. Yes to excesses that bring quick pleasure and prolonged wait. Yes to decisions that seem small today, but tomorrow become delay, pressure, and lack of control. The invisible mistake is expensive precisely because it comes disguised as deserving it, as emotional urgency, as reward, as I need this right now. And this is where stagnation begins to feed itself silently. The person is tired, frustrated, suffocated, feeling limited by their own reality, and then begins to use consumption as anesthesia. They buy because they had a hard week. They spend because they want to feel better. They squeeze themselves because they want to maintain an appearance that does not match their structure. They accept invitations, follow patterns, get into expenses they cannot sustain, all because they do not want to feel left out, diminished, forgotten, or inferior. But prosperity requires adjustment. Whoever wants to prosper needs to accept an uncomfortable truth. Not everything you can buy should enter your life. Not everything your emotions desire fits with what your purpose needs to build. Sometimes what you call freedom is just lack of control in beautiful packaging. Sometimes what you call living in the moment is just lack of prudence. And the worst part is that many people lose their future little by little, not because of one great financial tragedy, but because of small repeated permissions that drain stability, direction, and peace. Proverbs 21:20 says, "There is desirable treasure and oil in the house of the wise, but a foolish man devours it." Notice the strength of that image. The wise person has resources and preserves them. The foolish person has resources and consumes everything. The wise person understands timing, understands construction, understands prudence. The foolish person only sees the present moment. And this is the kind of mistake that seems normal in a culture that encourages excess, haste, and impulsiveness all the time. But Proverbs reveals that the prudent sees danger and hides himself. He sees beforehand. He perceives the risk. He knows that saying no to himself in certain moments is not loss, it is protection. And Proverbs 23:21 shows that excess leads to poverty, and that applies to much more than food or drink. It applies to any pattern without self-control. Excess desire, excess impulse, excess emotional compensation, excess need to please, excess appearance. Lack of control always charges a price, and almost always that price shows up when the excitement passes and the emotional and financial bill remains. That is why whoever does not govern themselves gets lost. And that is why discipline generates stability. Every time you do not know how to say no to the present, you are saying no to your future. That phrase needs to go deep because it changes the way you look at the most common everyday decisions. Saying no to a purchase made to impress may be saying yes to your savings. Saying no to an impulse may be saying yes to your peace. Saying no to an unhealthy social pattern may be saying yes to building your stability. So here is the practical part. Before any non-essential expense, wait a little. Breathe. Ask yourself whether that meets a real need or if it is only trying to ease an emptiness. Create a personal limit for emotional rewards. Learn to endure the frustration of not having everything right now. That is not poverty. That is self-mastery. That is practical wisdom. That is building instead of merely consuming. But even when a person begins to learn how to restrain desires, there is still an obstacle that keeps many people trapped for years. The difficulty of accepting correction and admitting that some of their own patterns need to be confronted head-on. Many people continue living in financial stagnation, not because they do not work, not because they do not dream, not because they do not want to change, but because they resist correction. And this is more common than it seems. There are people who repeat the same mistakes for years, go through the same struggles, live the same cycles of delay, lack of control, waste and frustration, but always find a way to blame something external. They blame their salary, blame their family, blame the season, blame the economy, blame luck, blame the past, and of course there are real external factors, no one is denying that. But Proverbs reveals that there comes a point where the problem is no longer what happened to you, but what you continue tolerating within yourself. The problem is not only money. Many times, the problem is pride. It is resistance to instruction. It is the difficulty of admitting, I am getting this wrong. And while a person does not face that honestly, life remains stuck, because whoever rejects correction prolongs pain. This is one of the most expensive, invisible mistakes of all, because it does not show up at first as loud disorganization. Sometimes it shows up as self-defense. The person justifies themselves too much, explains too much, romanticizes their own mess, says that it has always been this way, that it will get better eventually, that God knows everything, but does not change patterns, does not review behavior, does not align decisions. Many people do not realize it, but there is a huge difference between going through a hard season and turning hardship into identity. When a person begins to protect their errors as if they were part of who they are, they close the door to wisdom. And this is where stagnation begins to grow deeper roots, because without correction, there is no maturity. Without instruction, there is no solid construction. Without confrontation, there is no true adjustment. The root of this is in behavior, because a person may listen to advice, watch content, want prosperity, talk about change, but if they do not accept a change of course, they will remain trapped in the same pattern. The wise builds, the foolish wastes. And sometimes the greatest waste is not money, it is the opportunity to learn. Proverbs 12:1 is direct in a way that almost hurts. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge. That means maturity requires accepting discomfort. It requires hearing what you perhaps did not want to hear. It requires recognizing that certain bad results are not bad luck. They are fruit. Fruit of decisions, fruit of habits, fruit of repeated patterns without correction. And Proverbs 13:18 shows that poverty and shame will come to the one who despises correction. Notice this. Despising correction is not only rejecting spoken advice from someone, it is also ignoring the signs. It is realizing the same mistake keeps repeating and still continuing to act the same way. It is seeing that impulsiveness hurts you and doing nothing. It is noticing that the mind is sabotaging your life and continuing to feed the same cycle. And Proverbs 15:22 closes this logic powerfully. With many counselors there is good success. In other words, Whoever wants to prosper needs to stop being self-sufficient. They need to accept that at some point, outside perspective, wise counsel, the right instruction, and practical humility can shorten years of suffering. Correction is not humiliation. Correction is mercy in the form of direction. It is like driving with a flat tire and turning up the volume of the radio so you do not hear the noise. The problem is still there. The damage is still growing. The structure is still being compromised. But the person prefers to silence the signal instead of stopping and correcting it. That is what many people do with financial life. They feel that something is wrong, perceive the weight, notice the delay, see the chaos, but instead of reviewing habits, they only try to distract the mind. They keep buying, keep improvising, keep justifying, keep postponing. But ignoring the problem does not prevent the damage. It only makes the damage grow. So here is the practical application. Review your mistakes without self-deception. Seriously ask where you are repeating patterns. Seek wise counsel from those who build with prudence, not from those who normalize lack of control. Stop romanticizing financial disorganization as if it were part of your personality. That is not lightness. That is risk. That is not freedom. That is vulnerability. And when a person finally accepts correction, something begins to clear up inside them because they realize that it is not enough to stop making mistakes. It is also necessary to give a name to the future, develop vision, and understand that without a clear destination, any resource slips through your hands. There are people who earn money but build nothing with it. They receive it, pay whatever shows up, solve the urgent, cover one hole here, another there, and in the end cannot see where the fruit of their own effort went. And this is one of the most serious hidden principles of financial stagnation: lack of vision. The problem is not only money, it is absence of direction. Without vision, resources lose strength because they do not find purpose. Many people do not realize it. But stagnation begins when life becomes only maintenance of the month. The person does not think about construction, only about survival. They do not think about stability, only about putting out fires. They do not think about the future, only about easing the pressure of the present. And when this becomes a pattern, the mindset gets used to having little horizon, little prudence, and little intention. Without vision, money disappears. It enters a person's life, but finds no structure to remain, because whoever does not define a destination almost always wastes resources without realizing it. Proverbs reveals that where there is no vision, the people perish. This is incredibly deep, because it shows that lack of vision is not a detail, it is a factor of deterioration. When a person does not give a name to the future, the immediate begins to rule everything. Desire becomes priority. Impulsiveness gains space. Behavior becomes hostage to urgency. And the root of this is in behavior, because a life without clear goals is always more vulnerable to waste. Proverbs 24:27 speaks about preparing your work first, and Proverbs 16:3 teaches to commit your works to the Lord. In other words, the wise man does not live adrift. He organizes, he plans, he aligns what he does with what he hopes to build. This is where wisdom comes in. Prosperity requires vision, and vision requires decision. You cannot continue treating money as something that only passes through your hand. Money without direction becomes wind. And many people are tired, frustrated, and stuck precisely because they never stop to clearly define what they want to build with what they receive. Money without vision is like water spilled on sloped ground. It may pass through your house, but it does not stay. That image is powerful because it explains exactly the life of someone who keeps working but sees no fruit. The resource arrives, but runs off. So the practical application here is simple and serious at the same time. Give a name to your future. Define clear financial goals, even if they are small. Establish real priorities. Begin to think about savings, structure, organization, and construction. Ask yourself what needs to be protected, what needs to be corrected, and what needs to be developed in the coming months. That is practical wisdom. That is aligning life. But there is another point that may be silently hindering this process. Even when a person is already becoming more aware, the environment in which they live, listen, and feed their mind may be sabotaging everything their faith and discipline are trying to build. Many people want to change their lives, but remain surrounded by an environment that normalizes scarcity, lack of control, and mediocrity. And here is another hidden principle that almost always goes unnoticed. The place where your mind dwells directly influences the type of life you build. The problem is not only money, it is also environment. Conversations, influences, examples, collective habits, and emotional patterns that weaken vision, discipline, and responsibility. There are people trying to prosper while listening every day to words of defeat, trying to align life while living around people who mock prudence, despise correction, and treat disorganization as something normal. Many people do not realize it, but the wrong environment creates invisible exhaustion. It keeps draining direction, weakening self-control, silencing vision, until the person begins to accept as normal, living stuck, lost, and limited. And when scarcity is repeated too much around them, it runs the risk of entering the mind and becoming identity. Proverbs reveals that whoever walks with the wise will become wise. That shows that prosperity is also influence. Wisdom is also companionship. Direction is also environment. Proverbs 14:7 instructs to depart from the foolish man, and Proverbs 27:17 shows that iron sharpens iron. In other words, the right environment does not merely welcome you, it sharpens you. It confronts, corrects, strengthens, and matures you. But the wrong environment feeds impulsiveness, victimhood, excuses, and waste. The root of this is in behavior, because no one remains neutral for very long in the middle of certain influences. What you hear frequently begins to shape what you tolerate, and what you tolerate today delays your tomorrow. That is why whoever wants to prosper needs to protect their mind seriously. Not every environment deserves access to your vision. Not every conversation deserves space in your construction. The wise builds, the foolish wastes, and there are entire environments specialized in teaching waste with an appearance of normality. Trying to grow financially in the wrong environment is like planting good seed in contaminated soil. The problem is not in the seed, it is in the ground. There is potential, there is ability, there is value, but there is a lack of soil that favors growth. So the practical application here is clear. Reduce contact with defeatist thinking, with influences that push you toward impulsiveness, and with patterns that weaken your sense of responsibility. Draw near to content people and principles that build up your mind, strengthen your self-control, and expand your vision. Shielding the mind against the normalization of mediocrity is also a form of practical wisdom. And here the matter begins to touch an even deeper level, because after vision and environment, the central question remains. After all, what is the key that truly changes financial life from the inside out? Proverbs points to an answer that many people ignore because it seems too simple, but it is precisely there that the most lasting transformation lives. Many people seek a quick formula, a financial miracle, the perfect opportunity or instant change, but ignore the process that truly transforms a life. Wisdom consistently applied. This is the point where everything begins to come together. The problem is not only money, nor only behavior, nor only environment, nor only isolated discipline. The problem is misalignment. It is wanting results without process. It is wanting prosperity without adjustment. It is wanting fruit without foundation. Many people do not realize it, but life changes when the mind changes, and the mind only truly changes when it accepts instruction, correction, prudence, and direction. Proverbs reveals that wisdom is worth more than haste, more than appearance, and more than brute force. The wise builds, the foolish wastes, and stagnation begins when a person lives waiting for something external to solve what only an internal transformation can align. Prosperity requires adjustment, and that adjustment begins when you decide to stop chasing shortcuts and start building principles. Proverbs 3:13-16 says, "Blessed is the man who finds wisdom." Proverbs 4:7 commands us to get wisdom. And Proverbs 8:18 shows that enduring riches and righteousness are with her. Notice that, enduring riches. Not merely momentary gain, not merely temporary relief, not merely appearance. Endurance, structure, foundation. This is where wisdom enters in a spiritual and practical way at the same time, because it begins to show that God is not only interested in getting you out of hardship, He wants to align your mind, your character, your behavior, and your decisions. Wisdom is like a master key. It does not create the door, but it opens what brute force never could. There are doors that will not open with anxiety. There are doors that will not open with impulsiveness. There are doors that will not open with lack of control. They open when a person learns to think before acting, plan before spending, correct before repeating, serve before demanding, build before appearing. That is practical wisdom. That is the fear of the Lord producing understanding for real life. At the end of the day, what changes a financial life is not only more money, it is more wisdom consistently applied. When you learn that, you begin to realize that true prosperity is not born in an emotional leap, but on a path of alignment. It is born when you govern yourself, when you break cycles, when you adjust habits, when you organize decisions, when you stop romanticizing chaos, when you stop living only to keep the month standing and begin to build something that has fruit, stability, and purpose. And it is right here that this content stops being only about finances and begins to touch the heart more deeply. Perhaps God is using this correction to show you that your life was not called to waste, lack of control and confusion, but to wisdom, direction, and construction. Because when wisdom enters, it does not only change the way you deal with money, it changes the way you see yourself, your path, and the future that can now begin to be rebuilt on a solid foundation. Financial stagnation does not always show up only as lack of resources. Many times it appears as an invisible pattern that has been repeating for so long that it started to seem normal. And this is one of the greatest dangers. When what is silently destroying you begins to be treated as a common part of your life, impulse without control, work without direction, desire without limits, money without vision, pride without correction, wrong environment, weak discipline. All of this keeps piling up inside until the person looks at their own reality and can no longer separate what is a season from what has become a cycle. But Proverbs reveals that the root of change is not only in the resource you seek, it is in the wisdom you apply. Because Proverbs was not written only to talk about morality, religion, or good behavior. It was written to teach a person how to live with practical wisdom, with prudence, with discernment, and with direction. And when wisdom enters, chaos begins to lose strength. When wisdom enters, impulsiveness begins to be confronted. When wisdom enters, the mind becomes organized, habits line up, vision becomes clear, and the future stops being a threat and starts becoming a construction. You do not need to remain trapped in the same cycle. You do not need to accept as destiny a life that is always tight, tired, suffocating, and unstable. You do not need to keep calling normal what is stealing your peace, blocking your prosperity, and weakening your construction. But you also need to understand one thing with great honesty. Change does not begin when money increases. It begins when the mind aligns, when habits are corrected, and when wisdom truly begins to govern your life. So now I want to ask you a few questions and answer them honestly within yourself. How long will you keep tolerating patterns that sabotage your future? How long will you keep calling bad luck what has actually already become behavior? And how long will you wait for change on the outside without allowing adjustment on the inside? If this video spoke to you, comment down below right now. I will win with wisdom. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who needs to break free from financial stagnation. Because life changes when wisdom begins to govern.